This is our 12th, or I think we've done it most every month except with one banner. Maybe we missed Christmas time. But
just hold this up for a minute on her. I'm going to turn my thing off. That's probably why it's not.
Almost a couple of years.
So just hold that for a second.
So it's worldwide, and there's just great support across the world for Cuba. And we're here today doing our part on this rock day. Yesterday, which was Earth Day, and we're here, of course, to say no to the blockade. No, Cuba Sea blockade. No, so we certainly are here to oppose that. But we're also here because we stand in solidarity with a country that has made incredible gains. And one of them is yesterday was Earth Day, and Cuba actually is one of the few countries in the world, maybe the only country in the world that has a national plan to deal with the climate crisis. And it's being dealt with at all levels of government and in the communities, and they are doing an incredible job. But of course, they're just a little bitty country, so their life and well-being, of course, depends on what the rest of the world does. But that certainly is a gain of the revolution, is dealing with climate change. And Jairus will talk a little bit more about that, too, some of the other gains, I think. We have 4 speakers, I think, today, and we're going to keep it to that. And when that's done, then we will get in our cars and go up here to the corner of Lake and 22nd, take a left, and follow Joe, who's great bus driving skills. Interesting to be here for this. The other really good way to support Cuba now is to go to Cuba. It's important politically to do that, but also they've taken a big hit, of course, because of the pandemic and the blockade. And so any kind of support, monetary, that we can bring there as people to support the Cuban people is really necessary. So it's a great trip. 6 of us from the Solidarity Committee did it, and we all highly recommend it. We'll go with you. If you sign up, we'll sign up with you. So, Jairus.
Hello. I'm Jairus Heckler, and I wanted to talk a little bit about our trip to Cuba in February. There were 6 of us from the Solidarity Committee on the Americas that went, and we had a really fabulous trip. One thing about being in Cuba is everywhere we went, everyone was so appreciative and thanked us for coming as Americans. They kept saying over and over again that it's so important for us to come. I'm not going to say a lot about the trip. If you want to know more details, Carla over here videotaped almost all of the things that we did, and you can find those videotapes or those video programs on the WHAM.
It's not live, but
website. No, the WHAM YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And it was a Code Pink trip with Proximity Cuba, so that's kind of what you look for. When Marcy reported at our report back on April 11th, she said it's a time of big change in Cuba, and she said she always considered it to be a time of big change. They've been updating their constitution and their code of families. One of the things that they're working on is decentralization and bringing things more to the local areas. She mentioned a lot of other things in that, but I didn't write them all down. But one thing is their constitution and their way of governing is based on the rule of law and equity and social equality, sorry. And they did change their presidential terms from 2 years to 5 years, and they also limited the age of the president to 60, I believe. There was a lot of discussion about the code for the families. They had debates in all of the neighborhoods. We went to the Federation of Cuban Women, talked with them. They also were, they've always been kind of facilitating these conversations, not alone, but part of it. And some of the policies they're really stressing are for children, that children have rights, and from the age of 14 they can start being a part of those discussions. They will also are having decisions about the kind of families that they have, entering gay and lesbian families, making those aware, grandparents being more aware of being parts that grandparents can be parts of families, recognized like as parents. Then Sarah just mentioned a little bit about the catastrophic climate changes and the number of hurricanes that have increased there. But they haven't, as many of you know, they haven't developed a very effective evacuation system, and hardly anybody loses their life due to that. We did talk to people who are clear that Cuba could develop their own sources of energy, like solar panels and many other things, because they have a lot of sun, but they can't get the materials due to the blockade. We also spoke with the Ministry of Public Health with, I never pronounce his name right, it's Dr. Duran?
Right.
Yes, and he's like their Cuba, their, Dr. Fauci. Anyway, he talked about how the ministries all work together. They didn't recognize it as just a public health ministry issue. They quickly administered vaccines. Our talks a little bit of some of the things that they did. And Dr. Duran, when he talked about they didn't have the opposition to vaccines that we had here. He said that was ridiculous. That it wasn't ridiculous. He used the word
absurd.
Absurd. He used the word absurd. And they have vaccinated children all the way down to the age of 2. Then they're working on a vaccine from 7 months to 2 years because they believe the baby would have been protected while the mother was pregnant and if she had a vaccine. We also visited an agricultural cooperative. Simon did a good conversation about that in our report back. I've never seen lines in Cuba before, but there were lines, and some of the longest lines for rationing of chicken. And Simon reported about how that comes to the United States. They have to pay in cash, so the money has to be sent to Europe and changed into euros, and then come back to Cuba, and then go to the United States. And it's very complicated. So I'm going to say you would be inspired by going on a trip to Cuba. As Sarah Martin said in our report back, get yourself to Cuba as fast as you can. We also saw, we had a tremendous number of cultural events. The Museum of the Denouncement was really interesting about all the attempts, the terrorist attempts. And we went to the Museum of the Revolution. The new Fidel Castro Center is worth going to. We went to Fuster Studio and the Literacy Museum. So now that it's raining, maybe I'll stop. Anyway, thank you. And
okay, thank you, Jairus. Just 2 things. Tune in on there. No, we just hit the we've got those of you who have done this before know that we have a radio system. Kim will be our DJ, and so tune in to 92.3 on your dial. That's an empty band, and you will hear Kim, and she'll do her Cuba rap and be doing chants, and you can say the chants in the car, but be sure and honk with your horns too. So also she'll give you instructions too if you need to. 92.3. And Kim will also be on KPFA, which is the radio station.
Yeah.
KPFK. Okay. KPFK out of San Francisco, is it, or LA? Yeah, and it's one of the few Pacifica. It's a great station, actually. 8 o'clock tonight. So go to your computer and turn it to KPFK to hear Kim talk about Cuba. And here's the thing for the Cuba Film Festival. Greg from Anti-War Committee is gonna say something about Cuba. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for coming all these times to the party.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I'm really happy to see everyone here. I have a lot of respect for everyone here, so I won't waste your time. It stinks to give a speech during the rain. It's like, what? So one thing I want to say, and I hope you all feel it too, is about revolutionary humility. The Cuban people and the Cuban Revolution fills me with humility. What they have been able to accomplish under a blockade, under increased sanctions during a global pandemic, a horrible, cruel policy by Trump and now Biden, is to build the most sustainably developed society on earth, like Sarah said. World Wildlife Foundation says that too, a leader of agroecology. So last year on July 11th, we saw the culmination of America's efforts to take Cuba back for the rich and for imperialism. By now, I'm sure you've all heard about that. But the revolutionaries there didn't do what our government does when there's protests and send MRAPs and National Guard to shoot at people sitting on their porches, drive by tear gassing people sitting on their porches, like they did during the George Floyd uprising here. You know, here when 646 of us were protesting Trump stealing the election, we were actually real pro-democracy protesters. And they arrested all of us. Even the most out there estimates of how many were arrested in all of Cuba during and after July 11th, it's maybe 200 total. So even just Minneapolis that one night was far more politically repressive than all of Cuba. My point is, the Cuban government responded with humility. Cuban people who have done so much and have so much to be proud of and so much revolutionary energy responded with humility. They tried to understand what made the small segment of Cubans fall for it and what their legitimate grievances were and address those. Those people were being used for a purpose by the US and NGOs and all that machinery, but at the basis were some real problems that the government is humble enough to identify and talk about and address. There was spontaneity, but it was fostered by the US intelligence. Millions of people in Cuba today are not willing to lose a peaceful society, a project of social justice and national dignity, a revolution that, far from being content with its historic gains, is instead intent on forging new paths and taking criticism and moving forward. Not so here. Our government doesn't care what we protest, what kinds of uprisings happen. There's no change or real democracy. They beat, tear gassed, and arrested thousands just for daring to protest the constant extrajudicial slaughter of black people by police. And then there's no change. Did you know that America over the years has spent, and maybe a lot of people do know this, over $500 million on this single radio program, Radio Marti, a sister program to Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Asia and the other US propaganda stations? It's $500 million for this strange anti-communist radio conspiracy show, like almost like InfoWars at times, like Alex Jones type of stuff. And Cuba has always successfully jammed this radio show and the TV show versions of Radio Marti. At most 20,000 or so of the 11 million Cubans even know what it is, but it's cost $500 million. They've got planes flying around to broadcast it and no one hears it. But it also, Radio Marti is a sister station with NPR and Corporation for Public Broadcasting. There's a revolving door there. So when NPR runs stories about how awful Cuba is, remember that one of their goals is the overthrow of the Cuban people's government. That's their goal. If you go back and look at their July 11th coverage from last year, they cheered on regime change. Their headlines are really strange and off the mark. But then the answer there is also humility. We have to be humble with the people in our lives. You know, everyone here today didn't always see through all the manipulations in the news and everything. We didn't see through all the propaganda, you know, when we were kids, maybe. Some people did. I didn't. We're not some chosen geniuses because we can see through it. We need to be inspired by the humility of the Cuban Revolution and calmly and consistently explain to our fellow Americans the truth. They are being relentlessly propagandized by imperialists, relentlessly, from the point they're born and every day, every one of us too. So let's have more calm conversations with our fellow working class people and talk about sanctions not just on Cuba, but on a full third of humanity at this point, and explain how these harm the poorest and most marginalized in a society, and that they've never worked for regime change, if that is the goal. They've never worked for it. The first thing that the Cuban Revolution did to strengthen itself was promoting literacy, right? Here we are relentlessly propagandized and most people have no media literacy. 54% of adults here read at or below a 6th grade level. And in school they have us praising slave owners and genociders from the time that we're kids. We must be patient with people who grow up like that, with each other, with optimism and humility, educating each other. Let's fight as hard as the Cuban people and keep fighting forever. Thank you for your time. Cuba, see? Cuba, see?
Thanks, Drake, for that really important message. Rye from PSL.
Hello everyone, my name is Rye. I'm with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Thanks for being here today in this gross weather. Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for the organizers who put this on every month. It's so great to be here. So today I wanted to talk a bit about a struggle going on here in the U.S. and connect it back to Cuba and the blockade. I'm sure most of y'all have heard about the many recent attacks on the transgender community. All over the U.S., trans people are under attack, and not only are trans people under attack, but even cis people who are supportive of the trans community and help provide gender-affirming care to trans youth are under direct attack as well. In Alabama, doctors can now face felony charges and up to 10 years in prison for providing trans minors with gender-affirming care like hormone blockers and hormone replacement therapy, therapies which can often be life-saving. Idaho's House of Representatives recently approved a bill that would threaten anyone who helps a minor receive gender-affirming medical care or who helps a minor travel to another state to receive gender-affirming medical care to be sentenced to life in prison. In February, the governor of Texas instructed Texas's Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate instances of minors receiving gender-affirming care as child abuse. Gender-affirming care is being criminalized all across the U.S. Contrast these recent attacks on trans rights here with the state of trans rights in Cuba. Cuba has made incredible progress when it comes to LGBT rights over the last couple decades. In Cuba, gender-affirming care is treated as it should as healthcare, and healthcare in Cuba, as it should be, is free to all people. Since 2008, gender-affirming surgeries have been completely free in Cuba. Of course, as we all saw with the syringe shortage during the pandemic, the blockade has affected Cuba's ability to administer healthcare, and gender-affirming healthcare is no exception. So not only is this blockade a human rights issue that all of us as working class people should care about and fight against, the blockade is a trans rights issue as well. The Cuban people are being punished by this blockade for the crimes, in quotes, of self-determination, decolonization, resisting imperialism, and building socialism. The U.S. capitalist class thinks that if they make life hard enough for the Cuban people, that they will give up on socialism. But for over 60 years, the Cuban people have not wavered and have continued their socialist project. We owe it to the international trans community, as well as the international working class, to both fight the attacks on the trans community here in the U.S. and to continue the fight against the blockade of Cuba. And before I hand the mic back over, I just want to lead a couple of chants. When Cuba is under attack, what do we do? When Cuba is under attack, what do we do? When trans rights are under attack, what do we do? When trans rights are under attack, what do we do? Alright, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rye. And now Franklin from the Minnesota Cuba Committee has a few words to say. Okay.
Otherwise, people are going to get sick. By our count.
Right.
We have to go to Cuba for that. Anyway, I'm going to start by just making some comments about the U.S. blockade because Cuba must end now. I mean, yesterday. This year marked, the 60th anniversary anniversary of the beginning of the U.S. blockade of Cuba, a collective punishment of the Cuban people for independence from U.S. control. The blockade needs to end. For 60 years, the U.S. empire has waged a relentless economic war against the Republic of Cuba. This comes in the form of the imposition of unilateral sanctions, which today have cost the island nation more than $120 billion. Within the U.S. sanctions on the blockade touch every part of Cuban life. They restrict access to medicine, food, building supplies, and crucially material for vaccine development, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. The sanctions are also designed to smother Cuban economy by restricting travel and prohibiting businesses from trading with Cuba if they also wish to trade with America. What justification does the United States give for this inhumane blockade? Today, the United States stands virtually alone in upholding the blockade. In 2021, for the 20th consecutive year, 184 United Nations member states voted in favor of resolutions demanding an end to the sanctions, with only the United States and Israel voting against. Okay, I'm sorry. Even among imperialist nations, the global consensus is clear. The illegal, immoral, and deadly U.S. blockade on Cuba must end. I'm going to close the remark by saying Cuba may have seen a kind of revolution, but the blockade persists and U.S. subversion continues. As long as Cuban development is stifled by the U.S. empire, it is ordinary Cubans who will suffer the consequences. There is only one way to alleviate the suffering of Cuba in the long term, and the demand is universal. The U.S. blockade must end. Cuba see, blockade or no.
Cuba, see? All right, let's do it. Let's drive for Cuba, all right? And 92.3, tune in 92.3 and honk. And I'm not sure how many people will be out in the streets today either in this miserable weather, but we will see. Thanks, everybody.
So